A little additional background I think that applies here. I started life out as a nuclear engineer. Spent 5 years at a power plant safety guy. I was the fellow who did all the analysis, played all the what-if games with the computers, wrote everything in Fortran, 80-column cards, you might remember that. But it had a lot of impact, I think, on how I got into cyber and how it all plays forward in what we're seeing today. No doubt, we were talking about this earlier at lunch, that the pandemic has just accelerated, just shoved everybody into the digital age a lot faster than they probably wanted to be. That's an opportunity for guys like me who make investments. It's also a risk for many people because they're just not ready. So this pitch I have, I wrote a book it was published in 2018 called Digital Resilience. I have a couple here if anybody, I couldn't bring a box, but I brought a few. It's interesting to note today, I counted 3 times that Director Easterly mentioned the word resilience. And there were many times the healthcare panel mentioned it. And I dare say 5 years ago, that word was not in the cyber vocabulary. So I'm thrilled that I started a trend and that it continues to this day. So in 2008, our good friend Dick Clark wrote a book called Cyber War, which was pretty interesting read for me at the time. I hadn't really thought of cyber in that context since I was right in the middle of my venture career. But the question is, are we winning the cyber war? And I would say that we're probably not because of the current things such as the cover of The Economist. This is a big ransomware article that they did. We've talked a lot about ransomware today. It is an extremely profitable business. And I've yet to find a startup that has successfully figured out how to defeat it. I'm involved in a startup that I think has a chance, but because it is so profitable, it's going to be hard to do it. Mentioned in the introduction was a company called Shape Security. If you've ever heard of it, this was a company that defeated bot attacks against websites, and the point of it was just to keep moving the cheese on the website long enough so that the bot would go to another website. It cost too much. The bad guys wouldn't hang around. They'd just go to another website. It was about an economic breaking of the business model. Technology was very hard, but it was about breaking the business model. And that was the first time I had done a startup that had thought about that. So I'm on the search for a ransomware business model breaker, because I think that's probably the only way we can really do it. So I've been around a while, like many people in this industry, and there are these trends. I'm not going to go through them. I'm going to burn through the first handful of slides pretty fast. We've all lived through this stuff. It started out with antivirus. The market got very big. Antivirus business today is about $8 billion. Then we had network security with all the firewall vendors and the Vontus and the PGPs and all those that I invested in. That's a huge business, as we know. Then we got to current day attacks, these zero-day APTs and all that. This is FireEyes coming out, parties. And many times in the venture business, we often say, you know, along comes some great technology and the problem is pretty clear, but it's not a big problem yet. And then we say, well, then a cloud moves over that company and it rains on that solution and it just grows like crazy. That's what happened to FireEye when the APT world evolved. So, you know, this has got everyone's attention, hundreds of billions of dollars, 3,000 plus companies. I'm responsible for about 25 of those. And of course, policy. We finally, I'd say in the last couple of years, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe just because we had to, we've actually got our act together. We have the CISA, we have in the White House now, we have just things are starting to come together. And it's, of course, for me and others, it's a fantastic thing. The NIST cyber framework, I think, is really part and parcel to understanding how to think about this. And I spend a lot of time talking to boards, public boards and private boards about digital resilience, but mostly about how to think and frame this. This book is it's for people who are not in the cyber business, how to think about what is a network, what is a firewall, what do these things look like, and how do we relate them to our real world? So for me, and I've heard this today, the tipping point for me was the Target attack. I had spent all these years investing in prevention and detection. It's all I had done, it's all that mattered. And then Target happened, and I had retired from Venrock and was trying to play golf with my wife and a few other things when this happened. And Vinrock asked me to go into a company, one of our portfolio companies, be the CEO to resurrect it. It had some issues, but this was clear that we had a problem, that the bad guys were now inside the network. It was said very clearly earlier today that the perimeter, it doesn't work. And it doesn't, but you still have to have it because then you really would be in trouble. So, and then of course in 2017, not Petya, WannaCry, all these things happened on my watch, and I was just watching this just unfold. The nature of the company, RedSeal, where I'm the executive chair, we were sort of embedded in a lot of three-letter agency companies and stuff. I spent some time working with the FBI. I spent some time working on the Sony breach and some other things. So I learned quite a bit more than I expected to learn as a CEO. I thought I was just going to go in there and fix sales and products and marketing. Instead, I got involved in a lot of the strategy that companies started to deploy to defeat these things. And of course, the big one that we've talked about at great length today was solar flare. I must say, I just have to say this, but it concerns me when people say, you know, it's just the nature of software that it can't be perfect. I think you always have to try to go for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of success at some level, but you always have to be wanting to do the best you can and try to make it as perfect as possible. And, you know, all the things that we're doing. So what cost is this? Is a real expensive problem, as you all know. Anyway, the real cost is trust and confidence. We heard Director Easterly say that this morning. The big deal is trust. We heard the fellow from GHQ talking about trust. These are very important things. And at the end of the day, you know, if you have a company that you trust its product and you have a company you don't trust its product, you're going to buy the one that you trust. And so everybody has a little bit of this risk in their business model. So what happened? We all know what happened. Phishing was invented at some level. 0 days occurred and a hacker got inside. We know this because these people have been in front of Congress and it's been big news, headlines everywhere. And so this is what sort of began to percolate in my time as a CEO and a venture capitalist, that we needed some resilience. And resilience is a pretty widely known word, but what does it really mean in our business? You know, the threats evolve fast, the organization, okay, sorry. This thing keeps, never mind. It involves a whole organization. Everyone can make a difference. Organizations have to be prepared. But what does resilience really mean? So in the 60s, if you were in a car and you hit a tree or a telephone pole, you probably did not walk away from it. You were probably killed nearly instantly. But over time, we've cared about cars because they are our principal means of transportation. And so the resilience for cars began to evolve. We had seat belts. Everybody remembers seat belts. You know, people wouldn't put them on because they were worried they're going to wrinkle their clothes and stuff. But it turned out to work quite well, and so forth. We began to put special steel around the compartment where people were. Why do we put it around where people were and not the gas tank? Well, it's because the people is what is important. The industry, it's a natural, we can laugh at this a little bit, but naturally we're trying to save the people in this thing, not the gas tank or some other piece of it. But really, this applies to cybersecurity. What's important? You can't protect the whole vehicle. What matters in your company? You'd be amazed at how many boards I talk to. That's sort of an aha moment for them. They somehow, most of them, many think that I just have to do it all and I have to spend an infinite amount of money. Well, you can't. We know you can't, and there's not enough talent. We know that for a fact to actually implement it, even if you could spend the money. So you got to pick and choose. And in the end, at least in the automobile industry, we have picked and chosen very well. And now if you wrap yourself around a tree or a telephone pole, you are very likely to walk away with maybe a few bruises. It's amazing what we've done with automobiles in 50 years. I hope we can do the same thing with cybersecurity in about 50 days, I wish. But we're working on it. So I talked to a lot of people, a lot of CISOs. I didn't know this organization existed when I was working my book over, but I talked to a lot of CISOs that were customers of mine at RedSeal, talked to a lot of government agencies, and began to understand that it's not just technology, it is product. It's not just technology, it is process, which was actually way more important than product, and people, of course. You have to have people who are trained to understand the vocabulary, they can learn what to do, And so it's when these three things come together with the right culture, you can get really good results. So this was actually brought up by the fellows from JCQ. Again, you have to understand what you have. You have to measure it. You have to come up with metrics. If that was, if we could have had some more time with Director Easterly this morning, I would have really tried to, it's not a light conversation to talk about what we want to measure. But we do need to measure things. Boards are really good at numbers. So translating cyber into numbers was something we did a little bit at RedSeal. It was pretty successful, but we just need some general stuff that people agree to. I think of, like FICA scores. I think of things that we all can understand, golf, handicap, whatever. Pick some scores that we all understand and translate them to do it. And then you have to verify what you have. The key here for resilience is anticipation. This is where my nuclear engineering safety comes in, because when we build power plants, we have to think about all that can go wrong and design accordingly. Likewise, in the cyber network, and we have to think about what can go wrong and be prepared. Now, we can't design everything out because of the vast number of vulnerabilities. So you have to think about, well, what am I going to do? What's going to happen? What's the first thing I do when I have a problem? Here's the NIST framework. Again, this is just a flash card here for you. I'm sure everybody understands this. I think this is a terrific, thoughtful thing. I spent some time on talking to the folks at MITRE as well on their framework. There's a lot of good ones. So now we're sort of shifting into the board role. So it all starts with leadership. If the leadership doesn't care, then it really doesn't matter. But leadership with a good strategy, well-trained people, with good processes, tested processes, and then lastly, technology. Technology is evolving very quickly. People don't evolve as fast as technology. So you really have to sort of focus on those things. There's a great book, if you haven't read it. Fred Kaplan wrote this book called Dark Territory, which is sort of where the U.S. has been since World War II in cyber. And there's this new book that just came out a few months ago by Admiral Stavridis and a guy named Ackerman called 2034, which is about cyber, the beginning of World War III in 2034. And it starts with a cyber situation. And it's a pretty compelling read. Stavridis, all that he knows about the leaders of the world and the cultures of the various countries in the world, embeds it in the book. It's quite a good read. So the conclusions. Cybersecurity is a board fiduciary. It is. It's just like, do we have sprinklers in the manufacturing plant? Do we have fire escapes on the office building? Do we have cybersecurity in our technology and network? We have to. Cyber management is a primary function of the organization. You just have to have it. And it involves everybody in the organization, not just the CISOs and their teams. It involves everybody. We were just talking about a campus with 80,000 students. It's everybody's job somehow. It should be, framing it, make a plan, practice the plan. That's a famous old management code. Make a plan, execute the plan. You really got to do that, and you got to do it over and over. We're talking about desktop exercises and things earlier. Those are interesting, but I really think one day somebody ought to call the general counsel or the CEO in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, and wake them up. See what they say, see what they do. Who do they call next, and how do they think about it? You have to understand your assets. This is, I think, job one. What do I have? What do I know? There's lots of technology that'll give you IP addresses and all that, but it's more than that. What are your assets? What's important to you? Then you have to figure out how to measure it and verify whatever it is that you've done to protect it. And then you have to do this anticipation stuff. That's hard. A lot of people don't want to do that. It can be kind of depressing to think about what can go wrong, but I think you have to do that. And then train, practice, learn, practice, practice, practice. So in our society today, modern society, 2021, we still have firehouses. We still have fire trucks. We still have firemen and women. Why? Because buildings do catch on fire. Even modern buildings catch on fire. It's like, we just can't eliminate everything at the end of the day. So it's about practice. What does the fire department do when they're not putting out a fire? They are practicing constantly. If you're big and you have capability, I think it's important to practice. So some thought leadership books. This first one, Resilience Dividend by Judith Rodin of the Rockefeller Foundation. This actually is a pretty interesting book. in it, she talks about how cities and governments have organized a resilience role. There's a chief resilience officer, for example, in the city of San Francisco. What's their job? Earthquakes. There's a chief resilience officer in New Orleans. What's the job? Hurricanes. And on and on. So this is what can go wrong. So she, in this book, brought this to this level of the mayor and the organization of these major cities. Then beyond cybersecurity, this was written by McKinsey in 2015, where they actually used the word resilience and started talking about this anticipatory role, the role how cyber had merged from some dark corner in the basement with two guys working on a firewall to now being in the boardroom. And this is, of course, typical McKinsey, 5,000 interviews globally. Really quite a book. And then, of course, there's the most famous digital resilience book. But then there's Dick's book, his newest one, Fifth Domain, which I found very compelling and very good. Just some thought leadership books. That's it. I think Larry and I are going to pop over here and do some Q&A. But I appreciate your time, and I should have said I was going to burn through that at a pretty high baud rate, but I'm not sure how many people remember what baud is. But I did use it the other day, and nobody knew. So anyway, okay. Wait, we got to. That's all right. I'll do this. I'm a shameless marketeer, if nothing else. Anyway, great. Yeah. Thanks, Larry.
Well, great job.
Well, thank you.
We greatly appreciate that.
It was right on time.
Right on time. Well, we can count on that with you. Listen, you bring a very interesting perspective, and I always enjoy speaking with you about this because you do have that perspective of an engineer, a venture capitalist, an author, and so you're a student of the subject matter as well, being a practitioner and looking at it. And so I think that's unique. And as you really think about the resiliency that's going on. But I wanted to dig into this a little bit further with you in some of the areas. You've also lived through the evolution of cybersecurity with the internet. Not going to ask you your age or anything, but
okay.
So you've seen that iterations. Tell us a bit about how it's evolved and where do you see it today?
Wow, it has evolved from basically nothing. I was at Sun Microsystems between being a nuclear engineer and becoming a venture capitalist. And at Sun, we were on the UCPNet in those days, ARPANET. And I was there in the early 80s when the company was formed. But literally down the street and around the corner was the first node on the ARPANET at Rosati's, if you know where that is, on Alpine Road. In fact, the guy that built that machine just passed away last summer. Oh. There in my town in Portola Valley. Anyway, so it started from, connecting one dot to the next and one dot to the next. And I remember at Sun, I had one foot in engineering, one in the other. And we talked about firewalls. We talked about security. Firewalls are pretty common, right? You want to put a lock on the gate. But when we went from ARPANET to Tim Berners-Lee's HTML and all that, and it just exploded in our face, the evolution was we now have this virtual world, and in VC speak, we call that new real estate. We had new real estate in order to build things. And so what's a good metaphor for new real estate? The physical world. And so I watched it evolve from locking the door to putting up motion detectors to seeing who's going in and out of the door, where they get in their car and drive, and when they come back. And so you just sort of go through that whole thing. What I didn't anticipate so much was this resilience issue because the complexity outran our ability to understand it. No doubt, at Venrock, not only was an investor, but I was in charge of IT. We had a small shop, 50 people, and literally within about 3 years, I was overwhelmed. And I tried to keep up with it. In fact, just a quick story, I'm pretty sure I won the Checkpoint deal because when I was in Israel, trying to get the deal done, the CEO says, why should I give you the deal? And I said, well, because I bought your product and I installed it myself. So I understand what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And I actually could make it work. And I'm not a software guy, I'm a nuclear guy. But he was like, you did what? And I was the only VC that did. So I think that's why I got the deal. The point is, I am a practitioner. Yep. And I watched it evolve very quickly. And so when you're playing that game of learning and watching, so when Von 2 happened, when data leak happened, it was like obvious. Then along came PGP, which is a resurrection of the original PGP. We tried to deploy that into email. So all these things were like, it wasn't like, wow, what a great idea. It's like, sure, that's a perfectly natural evolutionary step. And so now I look at resilience, and I do think measurement and verification of what you have is key, and I'm still hunting for deals that will measure. In fact, I used to say, I don't know how many deals, how many cyber deals we saw at Venrock. I personally interviewed 10,000 deals, and I don't remember any of them ever measuring cyber. It's just not measured because it didn't need to be. Well, if you're going to have insurance, if you're going to all this, you're going to have to measure it. Right. You're trying to turn it into dollars and cents. So I think that's where we are in the world, and I think if we could do that, then I think boards would understand it better. I think employees would. Everybody wants to know what's our profits, what was our, if you can turn cyber into that language of business, including the risk, if you can turn it into business, I think you win.
That's great, and I think that evolution is happening as
Not
we
really,
see this.
yeah.
Slowly.
Yeah.
As it becomes part of the boardroom conversations now, and even the CISO being in the boardroom in many cases.
Yeah.
You brought on a very important part about how people can understand this. What does this mean? Let's bring it down to the small business and the person on the street. What does this mean to them?
Yeah, it means they're either screwed or they're screwed. It's been brought up many times today how hard it is, and it's so complex. And these small business people are just trying to deliver on their goods to their customers. And, it's hard. So I do think at the end of the day, you have to outsource it. And I was a Series A investor in Cloudflare. And when Matthew and Michelle brought that deal to me in 2009, they were graduating from the Harvard Business School, and they had this idea, it's like, why can't we bring Google, and they use these terms, Google, Microsoft, and Apple kind of security to all these, in those days, the term was long-tail businesses.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, again, it's like, wow, what a great idea. How do we do that? You just switch the DNS and run all the traffic through the Cloudflare system. And it becomes a CDN and a bunch of other stuff along the way. But the point was they were going to help that small business. And I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, we'll give it away if it's a little bit of traffic. We'll charge $5 if it's a little bit more or whatever. Even when I got to, even at RedSeal, we use Cloudflare, even though it's a 150 people and $50 million company. We still use Cloudflare. I think it's like $6 a month. But there's 20 or 200 million of those companies, right? So and we get Microsoft, Google, Apple level security. Yeah. That's a big deal. That's what you have to do. You have to outsource it. I don't think you outsource it necessarily to people, engineers. That's very expensive. And they're only going to be as good as their training and their capability. I think you need to automate it as much as you can. And the machine learning, and I've got some machine learning deals I'm working on right now in this area of configuration, control, and anticipation. So I think that's where it all goes at the end of the day. Just like turn on the water, turn on the faucet, out comes the water, plugs up in the wall, out comes the electricity, plug in to the RJ45, and you get secure internet.
It's interesting because, you're screwed or you're screwed. We got to come up with a better answer than that, don't we? And, think about, who's got to solve the problem. This is a multi-dimensional, complex problem. And you talk about the evolution of car safety. A question that I've asked a scenario is car skidding. Whose problem is it to solve? Is it the automobile manufacturer? Is it the steering? Is it the brakes? Is it the tire manufacturer? Is it the road construction people? Whose problem is it to solve?
Is it the guy behind the wheel?
Is it the driver issue? Exactly. So in this case, whose problem is it to solve?
Well, it's everybody's problem. We have to have standards, and standards are best deployed by governments, whether they're national, local, whatever. We have to do that. We have to make it economical to deploy those standards. You can't just put a heavy burden on industry. It's a tax, which is just like cyber. Cyber threat is a tax. So you got to do that. Then and you can't do it all at once. You're going to have to work into it, just like we started with seatbelts, and today we have airbags. In fact, we have self-driving cars almost, right? Yep. It's amazing the statistics. The DOT shows that these self-driving cars, are like, I forget the numbers. I'm not going to try to quote it, but they're multiples safer than not.
Yeah.
Where'd that come from? That came from technology. It came from entrepreneurs, and it came from people who said we can do this better. Now, I don't think self-driving cars has been legislated yet, but if it really proves itself good, why wouldn't it be ultimately? So I think that's the evolution, the evolution of learning by society. But I think at the end of the day, government has a response. Look, it's in the, we could get into the vaccine, anti-vax stuff, but right there in the Constitution, in the first paragraph says, provide for the common defense. It's like, that's what cyber is. It's provide for the common defense. It's the government's responsibility right there. How it's deployed is up to us and who we elect and how we choose to take those policies. But I think it is, at the end of the day, their responsibility. Now, I don't know if anybody's going to throw me out or not.
Well, yeah. I think there are a lot of contributors to it as well.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
Yeah, a lot of, and it's interesting because, just using the analogy of autonomous cars, there was, I think Google and Delphi had put some autonomous cars on live roads out in the Bay Area. And there was one almost incident, and the mainstream newspaper put out a headline, 2 autonomous vehicles almost crashed. The tech headline was, they didn't crash because actually the sensors, it worked. Exactly. So I think that's interesting.
I was cruising down El Camino one day in my Tesla, and there was a self-driving car in front of me, and it just came to a screeching halt. And a bus in front of it had just pulled over half a lane, and the car wasn't smart enough to go around. So all the traffic, and all the way back, it just stopped it all. And of course, there was a headline, cars honking, disturbance, and then this car kind of screwed up. The bus moved on and the car just sat there. Hey,
Listen, we've heard a lot about what can happen if. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to add another question to that, just corollary to it. So what's at risk? But also talk about what happens if we get it right.
Wow, what happens if we get it right?
Yeah.
Well, I think we grow faster.
Yeah.
We grow faster because we're no longer pouring precious money, profits, capital into what I consider a tax. Cyber's a tax. Company has this much money, I have to spend this much on my cyber, I don't get to put that into customer service or R&D or whatever. So it's a tax. And when you don't have that kind of capital, things slow down. So the economy will slow down. If we get it right, the economy might go back to a natural speed of development, innovation, and good things for people. So I think we have a huge incentive to get it right. And besides, then we don't have to worry about, I tell you that what do you say, the cyber homicide?
Yeah.
That's the first I'd heard of that. We don't have to worry about that
right
going forward. But risk, risk is a funny thing. At least as a nuclear engineer, risk is a probability of something happening times the cost or the result of that. And you put those two together, and it's either below or above a certain floor or level standard, and it's okay. But I think business risk is different because some things you can measure, some things you can't. Some, business risk, what if your reputation is soiled, but you don't know it? And the board wakes up one day and market share is sliding. How can you recover that? So these are complicated things that I think have long arcs, more than a quarter, that boards need to be thinking about. So I think there's unintended negatives on the risk side that if you don't really appreciate what's going on. So that, again, you got to measure. You got, surveys of your customers or whatever. I'm rambling on the...
Well, no, I mean, because it also gets into the health and safety of things as well.
Yeah.
Suzanne did a great job of pointing out the critical infrastructure, and if the risks are real, they're huge. Hopefully we don't have to wait for a major incident. But if we were able to inoculate ourselves from it, then food safety, supply chain, everything.
Wow. That'd be amazing.
It would be amazing. Let's talk about policies.
Policy.
Just policies. So a lot of policies coming out around cyber.
Yeah.
Federal looking at it, states, local governments, a lot of people in the hands. Do we have the right policies in place, or can we get there to make sure that they're keeping up with the evolution and the acceleration of technology and the cyber threats?
I don't have a great answer to this question, but I do know this, that just like schools, just like traffic laws, just like air and water policies, it's really best local because we're living it. We're experiencing that event, school policies, what have you. The decision to go back to school or not, I think that is a case in the vaccine situation. It's better decided locally. If the people have figured out how to exist without spread, then so be it. They shouldn't have to depend on that. Now, I do think if you take that up a stack, really where policy comes in at the sort of national levels, I do believe, again, I think to get anything great done in this country, 4 things have to happen. The president has to care and make a big deal out of it. If they don't, or if they did care and then they change their mind, it's amazing how quickly things die. Got to have an industry ready to scale it. You got to have academia to generate the students, the grad students to invent it. And then you got to have the public who cares about it and supports it. Examples of that being great: World War II, the Apollo space program, things like that. Failures: Vietnam. It was great in the beginning and then it fell off. Obamacare. We were hard on a big energy revolution in this country for 2 years, and then Obama switched to healthcare. Energy went by the side. We lost a decade in evolving our energy policy. So I think in this sort of philosophical thing, now that my ripe old age, I can talk about these things. But really, we need the president to care. And I mean really care. And we sort of did. Congress did the solarium thing. That was huge. Sort of puts in place some positions, and Easterly's a great example of that. Krebs before her. This is all good stuff, and I just wish that, and I hope that when State of the Union comes, the president puts cyber and cyber strategy for the country and cyber protection, or whatever, however you want to phrase it, at the top of his list, not on page 20. So that's why I think the national plays. It's important, and they can provide capital or guidance or standards like NIST. I think NIST is a big deal. But then I think it's a local implementation.
So that deployment, sort of like roads and other things, there has to be some type of consistency. Because again, if we go back to every city making different directions, it's almost like, if you're thinking that, your garage door opener is, a point of, able to breach our whole, electric grid, then if your neighbor doesn't do it and you do it, then it's...
So there should be a standard.
There's got to be a standard.
Right.
But the deployment.
Certain protection, certain minimums, Water, water purification, things like that.
That's great. What about corporate policies?
Which policies?
Corporate
policies. Depending upon which decade you went to business school, they might have taught you that the most important thing was shareholder value, or they might have told you that it's community and total value. I'm from the community total value space. So a corporate policy has to take that into account, not just the shareholder results, shareholder values. So you got to have, anyway, I think corporate policies are real important, and they obviously have to live in the scope of the community and other policies. But you have to have policies. In fact, we have a system of laws that if you have the right policies and something bad happens, you can say, well, I had a policy, I'm doing the best I can. I have a safe harbor. I have protections as a company. You can't put me out of business because I wasn't paying attention.
Right.
I was paying attention. That's real important, particularly in cyber.
Well, 1 second go after some Q&A, but I did want to ask you, because I know this is something you're passionate about. Are we developing the skills of the future? Are we training the next generation of people to deal with the problems that we have today, as well as the foreseeable threats of the future? Well,
I was encouraged to hear about the Cyber Corps, those kinds of concepts. And that was terrific. That was news to my ears today. Maybe I'm not reading the right stuff, but that's really important. And so I think what's missing is we should all be taught a little bit about to do something for the greater good. We got to do what's good for us. You got to be, but we also need to be the greater good. I grew up right out of middle-class Fort Worth, Texas. My dad was a D-Day veteran. My mom was a school teacher, and we all did public service and all that other stuff. So we seem to be losing that. It seems to be more about the greater profit motive, and I worry about that. I think corporate leaders can affect that, and I think national leaders can affect that. So that's what I think we need to teach. A little bit about, we're all in this together.
Right.
If we don't get it right, what does it matter?
Little civics.
Yeah, little civics.
You have some questions?
Yes, we're going to start Q&A, and
was a good one.
to
Thank
get the juices flowing, I'm going to ask the first question.
Uh-oh.
And you know I'm a big fan of digital resilience. So one of your slides said difficult to predict, impossible to prevent. So this is a two-part question. The first part is it truly, have we reached the point where it's truly impossible to prevent? Second question is SolarWinds, 100 companies, but thousands of companies downloaded the software, and therefore the malware. It is considered a persistent threat. So how does a company prepare for the possible operationalization of that malware in a year or two? We know it took the Navy nearly 3 years to get the Chinese off the ships. So how do these companies do this? So first part, is it truly impossible? Second part, what do we need to do about that malware that's still sitting out there with thousands of companies?
I do think it's impossible because we have such a legacy of existing stuff. I think new things can be designed to be way better. In fact, nearly totally resistant. But we've got such a legacy of existing stuff. So we'll never get rid of it. In terms of the solar, it's out there. Yes, this is like COVID, folks. We're going to be living with it for the rest. Our grandkids are going to have it. It's just what it is. It's now in our world. It's now in our system. So therefore, we have to prepare for it. We have to, just like polio. I mean, I remember getting my polio vaccine when I was a kid. I mean, we're just going to have to deal with it and create the solution. So for a company, if they don't know whether they have it or not, assume you have it and be prepared for it. You can, I think there's some technologies that we'll go through and hunt for, certain things. ML will help do that. I've got a little ML company in Brooklyn, New York that's looking at cyber feeds, trying to pick up signals, if you will. The problem is you get a lot of false flags. But yes, those companies need to be thinking about that. If they use SolarWinds or whatever, I'm on the board of a public foundation and they use SolarWinds and they said, well, we didn't download it. I said, well, that may not matter. It may still be there and you're going to download some update in the future and it just wasn't cleaned out. So be prepared. That's all I can say. That's resilience, right? It's resilience.
So question about the legacy technologies, specifically in the context of industrial control systems or operations technology.
Yeah.
For systems, rhetorical question to start off, is it possible to design a system that can be indefinitely updated or kept or resecured or kept secure? And if not, then what is the hypothetical ceiling for deployment of processor and communications out to the field that you're not going to be able to physically touch for years?
Oh my goodness. Well, on the other side of IP, all that OT stuff, very real. A lot of people are thinking about it. A lot of people are working on it. There's no way to prevent. There's no such thing as a perfect firewall to keep it out. So it's going to get there. IoT and the cheap devices, it's just going to be throwaway technology. And we may have to, if you had a problem, you may have to completely expunge your facility with whatever that board or piece of technology is and put in new stuff. I think you got to build that into your budget. You got to think about that from if you're running that part of the shop, that's just going to be part of the cost of operations. So I think that's how you look at it, because look what processors, we're not near the end. I read we're near the end of Moore's Law. We're not. We got a long way to go still, in my humble opinion. So there's going to be changes every year or two. It's just going to happen. Look at automobiles. Look what's happened in the last 5, 7. So you're just going to have to throw it away and start over. And maybe eventually all that legacy stuff gets replaced. Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe.
Question?
That's not a very good answer. Sorry.
No, thanks for your time today. Sean Calfin here. Just a question on resilience. I would assume that it would be easier in the digital realm than it is in the physical realm. As I was speaking with Jason earlier, and his basement flooded with Ida, he had backup sump pumps and ejectors, and at some point the layers of resiliency in a physically constrained world will fail. When we think about digital resilience, it's man-made. It can be manipulated, and when we think about concepts, whether it's zero trust, and I'm not too fond of that word, but we've placed a human emotion into our technology, and we need to extract it. Or when we think about limiting blast radius, or driving the asset value down to zero through ephemeral assets in the cloud, et cetera, abstractly, I would think that we could do it much more easily, setting aside critical infrastructure. But when we think about the emerging technologies that we have now and things that are on the horizon, do you feel that this could be accelerated at a greater pace once these broader principles are adopted?
I do. That's great. By the way, you picked up cliches from 3 different industries, blast radius, the whole 9 yards. I do think that. I think digital technology can move very fast and fix it very fast. But if it's not digital, then you're up against a wall. But maybe we replace it again. We have some accounting rules in this nation that slows up replacement depreciation. Maybe we should think about that. If there's a critical piece of infrastructure and that they want to digitize it, whatever, take water, for example. They want to digitize control and testing and what have you, but they're still on the depreciation curve of a 50-year pump. Maybe we ought to give them a break. These are things that policy can affect.
Yep.
So,
It's good. Let's look into your crystal ball.
Oh, no.
First. Yeah. Tell us, what does the future look like? We know what the landscape is today. Where's it going to look 5, 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah. 5, 10, 20 years from now. Well, I don't think we'll all be riding around in autonomous cars. I don't think that.
No Jetsons?
No Jetsons yet. I think there will be a lot of long-haul trucks and things like that. There was a great article just this weekend in Forbes, I think, or one of those business magazines about, moving 53-foot trailers around a shipping place where distribution center, all autonomously. I think that those kinds of things are coming.
Right.
So, and that's pretty fast. I think our communications we think it's cool now. I think it's going to get really cool. We'll be able to, my phone's on the table, but I could have it right here and just totally do whatever. I don't have to put something in my ears. All that's coming. I think medical response is going to go way up. I'm a huge fan of remote sensing, and the number of startups that are working on remote sensing, a silicon chip, or I say silicon, I don't mean it specifically, but some sort of small device that, for diabetics, it can be attached to the skin or whatever. The ability to ascertain COPD. I'm invested in a company called Spire on the West Coast. COPD detector. Wear it in the band in your underwear. You're having a COPD attack, boom, you're done. It's happened to my mom, so it's kind of personal. But those kinds of things that's 5, 10 years, 20 years, that stuff's going to be, and that all depends on the digital world, right? And the communication world, the Wi-Fi world, whatever. That is going to be the real estate on which all this new remote sensing stuff. So I think we may not make ourselves healthier, but our response to not being healthy is going to be very much better. And so I think transportation on the big scale is going to happen. I think, said earlier, also, I think we've got to get cyber into the elementary schools. Clean your fingernails, comb your hair, check your passwords, that kind of stuff. I mean, think about the opportunity.
Zero trust, right?
What? Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about the opportunity there. So that generation rolls through, and they show up in college, and they say, "Boy, this is a crappy piece of software. Why isn't this replaced?"
Right.
Some gal goes off, and they replace it. I mean, so I think it's very much you got to care and want, again, for the greater good. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think the digital technology is the place it'll happen.
Well, it's the greater good, but it's also enlightened self-interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. All right, what's next for you? What's going on? And then we got to wrap this up.
Oh, I don't know. I'm still investing.
Good.
I've got 5 or 6 small companies I'm involved with. I just joined the aerospace board, so I'm going to learn about all the 400,000 objects on orbit. That's going to be fun.
Yep.
And who knows? I might write another book. That was fun. That was fun to do, and it changed my life writing that book.
Great. Ray Rothrock, thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry.
Officer, VC, engineer, Thank you for spending time. Please give a round
Thank
of
you, guys.
applause.
Thanks for your time.